大木です。
大木くんか。
What do you do when the person you built your whole life with suddenly feels like a stranger? When the dinners grow quiet, the glances grow cold, and the love you once held like fire flickers into silence? Jennifer thought they were happy. Simple life, deep love. A marriage that had survived the years. Until one night, an old friend knocked on the door, and nothing was ever the same again. He was her husband's friend, but he saw her, listened, noticed, and then he told her the truth. And what happened next was a betrayal no one saw coming. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that just seeing them smile made your whole world feel right? Until one day, something in that smile didn't feel like it was meant for you anymore? Jennifer and Joseph weren't perfect, but who is? They lived a quiet life in a modest house on the corner of a slow street. No fancy cars, no lavish dinners. Just the kind of love that shows up every day on rainy mornings with shared cups of coffee, on weekend walks when they held hands without saying much, on those quiet nights when one fell asleep with their head on the other's shoulder. Their life was made of these small, sacred moments. And that was enough. They had been married for over 10 years. They didn't talk about romance much anymore, but it lived between them in gestures. He remembered how she liked her eggs. She never let him leave for work without his watch. That was their kind of love. Easy, dependable, safe. Until one afternoon changed everything. It was a regular Sunday. They had just finished lunch and were walking downtown, window shopping, people watching. Jennifer wore her favorite yellow scarf, the one Joseph had gifted her on their 7th anniversary. She reached for his arm as they crossed the street. He smiled at her. She smiled back. And then they heard someone call out, "Joseph?" A voice from behind, deep, familiar. Joseph turned. His face lit up in surprise. "Omar," he said, almost breathlessly. And just like that, the past stepped into their present. Omar had been one of Joseph's closest friends years ago, back when they were both still reckless and young, when life was louder, messier, wilder. They'd lost touch. Time does that. Jobs, cities, families, people drift. But now, fate brought them back together on that very sidewalk. They hugged like brothers who'd been at war and finally come home. Joseph introduced Jennifer, and Omar smiled warmly, respectfully, like he was genuinely happy to meet the woman his old friend had built a life with. There was laughter, nostalgia, that beautiful buzz of reconnection. Joseph didn't hesitate. "Come back to our place," he offered. "You have to come by. It's been too long." Omar agreed, and just like that, something shifted softly, silently, like the first breeze before a storm. That evening, their little home filled with stories and laughter. Joseph and Omar drank wine, remembered old adventures, teased each other like no time had passed. Jennifer listened, smiling, pouring more glasses, laughing along though a few times. She caught Omar's eyes lingering on her, just a little too long. She didn't think much of it, not that night. It felt good to see her husband so alive, so animated. She hadn't seen him like this in a while. Later, after Omar left, Joseph sat on the couch, smiling like a boy, eyes shining. "It's crazy," he said. "Feels like I got a piece of my past back." Jennifer nodded and went to make tea. But in the quiet that followed, a tiny ache began to settle in her chest. Not sadness, not fear, something else, something she couldn't name yet. And far away, without realizing it, a line had been crossed, a soft, invisible line between what was and what was about to become. They say happiness doesn't disappear overnight, but sometimes you wake up and realize it's not where you left it. In the days that followed that warm reunion, Jennifer started noticing small shifts, barely there changes that shouldn't have mattered, but somehow did. Joseph still made her coffee, still asked how her day was, but it started to feel more routine, less present. His eyes didn't linger on hers the way they used to. He laughed more with Omar than he did with her, and though she tried to dismiss it, blaming stress, work, or just the rhythm of long-term love, some part of her started to ache. Omar, on the other hand, was becoming familiar. He started visiting more. Sometimes he'd call Joseph and suggest they all have dinner again. Other times, he'd just show up with a bottle of wine or a bag of fresh fruit from the market. Jennifer wasn't sure what to make of it. At first, she was grateful for the company. Omar was polite, kind, attentive, maybe too attentive. He noticed things Joseph didn't seem to anymore, like when she cut her hair shorter, or when she wore earrings Joseph had forgotten he'd ever bought her. He complimented her cooking with sincerity. He helped her carry groceries without being asked. Once, she laughed a little too hard at one of his jokes, and when she looked up, their eyes met for just a second too long. That second lingered in her mind for hours afterward. She began to feel it, that thing she didn't want to name. It wasn't just that her husband was pulling away, it was that someone else was inching closer. She hated herself for noticing, for caring, for wondering what Omar saw when he looked at her. She'd always been faithful, loyal. She still was. But something had changed in the air between them, something neither of them spoke aloud. And Omar, he wasn't hiding it anymore. One evening, Joseph had to work late. Omar came by anyway, said he was just dropping something off, but he stayed. They sat in the kitchen, drinking tea, talking, laughing. Jennifer felt uneasy, but she didn't tell him to leave. She listened as he spoke about loneliness, about the ache of watching someone you once called family drift into a life you weren't part of. He didn't say it directly, but every word felt like a confession, wrapped in charm and sadness. And when he looked at her again, it wasn't a glance. It was a look, a quiet declaration. She turned away. Her hands trembled slightly. That night, lying next to Joseph in bed, she stared at the ceiling in silence. She missed the way he used to hold her tighter, talk to her softer, look at her like she was the only person in the room. She missed the love that didn't need to be spoken to be felt. She wondered if Joseph even noticed the way she'd been quieter lately. If he'd seen the way Omar had been looking at her, maybe he did. Maybe that's why he stopped looking at her altogether. The days stretched. Omar's visits became normal, comforting even. And Jennifer found herself dressing up just a little when she knew he'd come. A bit of lipstick, a different perfume. She told herself it was innocent, but deep down, a part of her heart had already started wandering. A part of her already knew something fragile was breaking. And no one, not even she, could stop what was coming next. Some betrayals don't come with a kiss or a lie. Sometimes they arrive slowly, dressed as silence. Jennifer began noticing things she hadn't dared admit before. Joseph, once so affectionate and attentive, was slipping further away. He came home later, touched her less. His words were shorter, and when they kissed, it felt more like habit than hunger. She wanted to believe it was just a phase, that maybe love gets tired, but it still stays. But there were moments when she watched him laugh into his phone or excuse himself to take a call, where her stomach twisted without warning, and she couldn't explain why. She didn't have proof, just a feeling like a thread quietly unraveling inside her. Omar, meanwhile, was the opposite, present, open, strangely loyal. His eyes met hers with warmth, but they were no longer just friendly. She knew it, and he knew she knew. One afternoon, as rain tapped gently against the windows, Omar stopped by. Joseph wasn't home. Jennifer opened the door. Hesitating, she wanted to tell him not today. But instead, she stepped aside, and he walked in. They sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the air between them heavy. Neither spoke for a long time. Then he said it. No hesitation, no apology. Jennifer ... I'm in love with you. Her heart pounded. The room went still. She looked down at her hands, trembling slightly. You shouldn't say that, she whispered. I had to, he replied. Because you deserve to know, and because Joseph doesn't deserve you. She stared at him, her throat tightening. What does that mean? He hesitated for just a second, but then, like something too heavy to carry anymore, he said it. He's seeing someone else. Jennifer froze. She waited for him to take it back, but he didn't. His voice was calm, certain. I didn't want to tell you like this, Omar continued, but I've seen it with my own eyes. I thought maybe it would stop, that maybe he'd come to his senses. But he didn't, and I couldn't sit here, pretending anymore. It was like the ground beneath her shifted. Her breath caught in her chest. The man she had built a life with, the man who had promised forever, was already gone. She didn't cry, not then. Instead, she just sat there, quiet, stunned, angry at herself for not seeing it sooner, angry at Joseph, angry at Omar, angry at the world for making love so fragile. And yet, when she looked at Omar, she didn't feel hate. She felt confused, because a part of her had already betrayed Joseph in her heart. Maybe not with touch, not yet, but with longing, with attention, with silence. She hadn't said it out loud, but she had let the line blur. She started avoiding both of them. She didn't return Joseph's questions with real answers. Didn't open the door when Omar knocked. She wanted to disappear. She wanted time to freeze. She didn't trust her own thoughts anymore. At night, she lay awake, replaying everything. The dinners, the late visits, the way her husband's eyes had started drifting toward his phone instead of her face. She wanted to hate him for cheating, but how could she when she wasn't innocent either? She was in between two betrayals his, and now the one blooming inside her. And the worst part? She didn't know who she was anymore. She didn't see Omar for 3 days. His absence was loud, unsettling. Like a voice suddenly gone from a room you didn't realize had been keeping you steady. Jennifer stayed inside. Curtains drawn, phone silent. Her world had split open, and all she could do was sit in the middle of the wreckage, not knowing what to do with the pieces. She didn't confront Joseph. Not yet. How do you accuse someone when your own hands aren't clean? She'd wanted to scream, cry, ask why, but something inside her held back. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was guilt. Or maybe it was because she already knew the answer. That night, just after 9, she heard the front gate click. Footsteps. She peeked through the curtain. Joseph. But he wasn't alone. Omar was with him. Her chest tightened. Her stomach turned cold. She opened the door slowly. The night air smelled of dust and tension. Her eyes flicked between the 2 men, her husband, relaxed and slightly drunk, and Omar, quiet, unreadable. "We ran into each other downtown," Joseph said, grinning. "Thought we'd both come by. Like old times." Old times, she almost laughed. She couldn't speak, just nodded slightly and stepped aside. Dinner was quiet, too quiet. Joseph drank more than usual, talking about nothing in particular. Jennifer barely touched her food. Omar barely touched his glass. The room felt like it was holding its breath. Later, Joseph passed out on the couch, one arm hanging off the side, soft snores filling the silence. Jennifer turned to clear the dishes. She hadn't realized Omar had followed her until she turned and found him standing there, just a few feet behind her. Their eyes met, and in that moment still, electric, undeniable something inside her broke open. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to, because she already knew. And this time, she didn't look away. What happened next wasn't planned. It wasn't even passionate. It was quiet, unsteady, like crossing a line you swore you never would, but somehow always knew you might. That night, Jennifer betrayed her husband, not out of revenge, not even out of love, but out of something deeper, loneliness, and the haunting realization that the person you gave your whole self to had already left long before you did. The next morning, she woke before sunrise. She sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the stillness. Joseph was still asleep. Omar was gone. She didn't cry. She didn't feel powerful. There was no freedom in what she'd done. Just silence. Just wait. In the days that followed, she didn't say anything about Joseph's betrayal. He didn't say anything either. Maybe he assumed she never found out. Maybe he didn't care. And maybe that was the worst part. They lived under the same roof, going through the motions. 2 strangers wrapped in a familiar routine. She cooked. He worked. They talked about groceries and bills, but never about what truly mattered. Because they both knew. What had once been love was now just memory, and memory doesn't hold hands. It doesn't kiss your forehead or ask how your day was. It just lingers quietly in the space between what was and what will never be again. Jennifer didn't end up with Omar, not because she didn't care, but because she understood something she wished she'd known before all of this began. That healing doesn't come from running into someone else's arms. It comes from facing the truth that love isn't just about being chosen. It's about choosing again and again, even when it's hard. And sometimes, when the choosing stops, the love ends too. So if you're still holding on to someone who no longer sees you, let go. Not because they don't deserve you, but because you deserve more than silence, more than routine, more than being remembered only in passing glances. You deserve to be seen.